Hello everyone. In today's presentation we're going to take a look at Move 3 of the introduction section in more detail. In particular, we're going to look at the 9 steps which are included in Move 3. So just as a reminder, we've already discussed Move 1, establishing a territory, Move 2, establishing a niche, and now we're in Move 3, which is addressing the niche. This move carries the function of demonstrating how the present study, the one that you're writing or the ones that you're reading, addresses the identified niche, the identified narrow area that is under investigation, as well as how the study contributes to the existing state of knowledge in that field. It previews important and essential elements of the study, so things like the research goals, questions, hypotheses, methodology, and perhaps even a glimpse of the results. So the arguments about the value of the research appear here. Lots and lots of very critical features of your introduction appear in this move, so it's an important one. Within Move 3, there are 9 possible steps, and this is the largest number of all of the moves. Many of these steps, though, are mutually exclusive. That is, if you have one step, you are likely not to have another step. So don't be overwhelmed by how many steps are included here. We're going to take them one by one. Excuse me. Move 3, which is called addressing the niche, is going to contribute to the field by kind of filling in the gap that you identified in Move 2, as well as contributing all that specific information that we just discussed. And you can see here in the steps that are on the screen that these steps kind of help fill in all those details, fill in the blanks about how the present study is actually going to accomplish filling that gap. All right, so let's look at these steps one by one. The first step is introducing present research descriptively. Authors use this step to describe the main elements, the main features of their study. So words like this paper or the study are often used. In some fields, you might also see personal pronouns, things like we did X, Y, or Z. So along with reporting verbs, things like report and argue. So you can see in the examples here that there's a descriptive element to what's being provided. We've got things like this paper reports on the results. In this paper we present preliminary results. All of these things that really kind of describe what the authors are going to do, that they're introducing their research. This is in contrast to this next step, which is called announcing present research purposefully. Most of the time, papers will only have one of these 2 steps, either the former or this one here. And in announcing the present research purposefully, the authors indicate the purpose of the research. Rather than to describe what their study is, they indicate the purpose. You might see terms like the aim or purpose. That's always a nice giveaway, along with things about the goals. Again, you could see the use of the pronoun we in some fields, and you're going to see verbs that also include things like report and describe, that sort of thing. Our next step is presenting research questions, and this step is where authors present the actual research questions in their study. Notice that these are more specific research questions than those general questions that we discussed in Move 2. Those general questions were questions raised about the field, whereas these questions are the actual research questions that the authors set out to try to study. These questions could be written as an actual question, which is the second example here. You can see the question mark. Or they could be written in a statement form, which is the first one. So we've got we set to find whether these secondary factors have a negative effect. They're proposing their question, they're describing their research question, but without putting it in an actual question format. So pay attention to that. The next step here is presenting research hypotheses, and this, again, authors are likely to include only the previous step, presenting research questions, or this step, presenting research hypotheses. It's unlikely that you would have both of them in the single paper. So in some studies, in some fields, authors use hypotheses more commonly than using research questions, and those hypotheses are what they're trying to prove or disprove in their study. And remember that just as in with the research questions, these are the research hypotheses. So they're the more specific, narrow, focused hypotheses, rather than the ones in Move 2, which were the general hypotheses, things that are in question in the field. These are the particular ones in the thesis, the thesis or the research paper. So let's look at the next step here. We've got clarifying definitions. This is an important step for a lot of people and a lot of papers because it's important to make sure that you're clear about how you're using particular terms. And sentences that accomplish this function of clarifying definitions are clear examples where the authors are setting forth or explaining how they intend to use a particular term or set of words in their paper. You can use some of the structures you see here. We use the term blank to refer to blank, or just blank refers to blank. The notion of blank means blank, and other structures of your own choosing, of course. But it's an important step to often include, particularly if the terms in your field are in flux, or if there are multiple definitions. A term's been used generally and more narrowly. So you'll want to make sure that you identify how important it is to use this step when you look at your corpus exploration later. The next step is summarizing methods. In some fields, authors indicate what the research methods or approach was in this study. So in this step, the authors identify either an analysis, an approach, any sort of tool or more methodological approach that the authors needed to set forth in their study. And they might need to highlight it here in the introduction rather than waiting to the method section so that readers know what's going to happen. And you can see two examples here where the authors are laying out the piece of the methodology that's maybe important to know as some background information. So we've got the direction vector was obtained by using the ZMAP method. And in the second example, we've got an application of simulation, multivariate statistics, and simulation metamodels. So again, laying out the sort of approach that they're going to be using in their analysis later. Often, papers also include this next step, announcing principal outcomes. In some fields, the authors need to state briefly the outcomes and results of their study, again, in the introduction. So they might kind of foreshadow what they're going to state later in the results section. So we see two examples here where we see examples where the authors say, we find that, right? So clearly stating these are the results, or we show that. So language that indicates the accomplishment, the doneness of the research. Okay. The next step is stating the value of present research. Authors may need to explain why their study is valuable. What sort of contribution does it make to the field? In these examples, the authors are claiming that the results can help in understanding a phenomenon, and the paper adds to literature on the topic. It's a place for you to say, hey, look, what I've done here is important, and it makes a difference. So you can see these examples. The first one, the results of this basic investigation can help to understand. Okay? The authors are saying what we've done is maybe simple, but it can have greater consequence. It has greater applications. And the second sentence has the same sort of effect. Okay, our last step, now we've made it through 8, here's number 9, is outlining the structure of the paper. And this is a common step in many, many fields. And authors indicate the structure and occasionally the content of the remainder of the research article. Authors often refer to specific sections of the rest of the article one by one. And this may occur over several sentences as authors describe each part of what the rest of the paper will include. So you may have examples like the first two. We have organized the paper in the following way. Perhaps there would just be a brief end of the sentence saying methods, results, discussion at the end. Or as in the third example there, you might have a series of sentences that all work together to accomplish the function of the outlining of the structure. So the remainder of the paper is divided into 5 sections. Section 2 describes this, section 3 describes this. So you may get kind of a lengthy set of sentences together, accomplishing that function of outlining the structure of the paper. All right, now that we've made it through all of that, your job is to look through these examples and figure out what step best describes what you see in the examples. So take a minute and pause your video and look over these examples, and when you're ready, press play. Okay, so let's look at these one by one. In the first example here, the sorts of information we might be looking for is language that might help us figure out what sort of function we have. And one of the things you can look at is that at the very beginning it says, in this work. Okay, that might be a clue to help you figure out, oh, it sounds like one of those present research, introducing the research sort of thing. And then as we look at the rest of it, we say that they're describing what their research is. They're not explaining the purpose of it, but they're just describing what it is. So this would be an example of the step introducing present research descriptively. The second step, and I've bolded some words for you here, or the second sentence rather, is a good example of the step that's really in contrast with introducing present research descriptively, and this is a good example of announcing present research purposefully. So this is a good example of how you can see that beginning of a sentence, the goal of our study. We don't see a description of what they did, rather we see a goal, so we see the purpose of what their study is. Okay. You might have noticed that there's a reference here in section 2, and that might have got you thinking, what if this is part of move 1? And you'd be right, kind of. A single sentence can have multiple steps, multiple moves within it. Most sentences have a main function. So this sentence, its main function really is to announce the research purposefully. But there is kind of a piece of move 1 embedded in it, describing describing previous research, and you can see that in the example there. So in the broader context of move 3, announcing present research purposefully, there's also a little bit of move 1, describing previous research, and it's the author prominent style of citation, in case you forgot that part. Okay, here's another example. Go ahead and pause your video. Okay, let's talk about what this sentence has got going on. Hopefully this one was one that you read and you looked at it and you thought, I know what this is right away. The question marks should probably be a clue that this is an example of a research question, or at least at a question, right? You need to take a look and look a bit deeper to decide whether it's presenting the general question, or raising general questions, or presenting research questions here in move 3. But you can see that these are examples of the questions from within a particular study. They say 2 sub-questions guided our study. Okay, so that should help you figure out these are the actual research questions that the authors are using, and thus this is an example of presenting research questions. Okay, here are 2 more. All right, let's look at these one by one again. And the first example, we've got a nice use of the word define, and so that should help kind of clue in that the function of this sentence is to clarify definitions. Okay, so the authors are helping to make sure it's clear what they're discussing. When we look at the second sentence, we have to kind of puzzle it out a bit further. We've got to look through a bit more, but you might notice the use of language that talks about the author's expectations. The authors are predicting or hypothesizing the outcome of their study, and this is an example of presenting research hypotheses. Okay, 2 more. All right. The first example here, that we see the authors are discussing what they have done, and you can see this is an example of summarizing the methods. So they're explaining the sort of methodological approach that they used. You can see examples of them talking about the autoaggressive and cross-asset returns, right? So a piece of their model or their equation. The second example we have to look through, in again, a bit more detail. Some of these examples, you have to really look through and try to figure out, like, well, what function is this sentence serving? There isn't a key word that I can just latch onto. I really have to kind of puzzle out, how is this sentence working here? But as we look through it, we can see that this is stating the value of the present research. They've identified why their study matters. What do people get out of their research? And you can see that this is kind of this highlighting of why our research is important. That the composite approach, the one that they've done, allows these other things, right? And it will also allow for some more things, generation of composites for jet streaks. So that their approach is going to allow for these new things that we can presume, even though we're not in their field, we can presume that these are useful and valuable things to be able to predict. Okay, another step. And here, let's talk about our answer again. This one hopefully should be one of the easier ones to figure out. And it should be easier because you might notice right at the beginning, they say, we found. Okay? That should help clue you in that this is announcing the principal outcomes. The authors are saying, here's what we found out. It's the short version. All right? So you don't know why, you don't know all the details. That's going to come later in the results and discussion sections of the paper. But they're giving you a little glimpse into the future and saying, here's the short answer to our study. We found this. Okay, and another step. Okay. This, again, should be one of the easier ones for you to notice, and often is one of the easier ones to write as well. The examples that fulfill outlining the structure of a paper, which is what this is, often are very formulaic. There are a few different ways people like to do this, and you'll figure out which way you like and which way your field likes, and you may kind of use that same approach over and over again in papers. And they can be fairly easy to identify. So we see here that the first sentence in this kind of set of sentences is the remainder of the paper is organized as follows. That should be a nice indication that you've got an example of outline structure of the paper. And the rest of the sentences help fulfill that function. So you can see sentence by sentence, the authors are saying this section does this section does this, and this section does this. All right. Now that we've made our way entirely through Move 3, you've got a few tasks to do. First, you should look at the home reading and see how you can help kind of clarify any of the steps that were problematic that we just went through. There's a short quiz for you to check your knowledge, and then of course moving on to the corpus exploration tests. And those are critical for you to be able to see how the move and steps that we've identified here really work within your field. Okay? We'll see each other again soon.